This episode is brought to you by Progressive. Progressive helps you compare direct auto rates from a variety of companies so you can find a great one, even if it's not with them. Quote today at Progressive.com to find a rate that works with your budget. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. This day, September 7th, 1968, 200 or so feminists and civil rights advocates are protesting the Miss America Pageant. This is taking place in Atlantic City, New Jersey. We'll get into the details, but the activists unfurled banners, spoke with the press, held a rally on the nearby Atlantic City boardwalk. And it was out there that one of, I would say, the most persistent political myths in American history was born. This image of protesters throwing their bras into a trash can fire. But the thing is, there was no fire, there was no bra burning that day. But this image and this notion of the bra burner stuck to characterize the 1960s and 1970s feminist movement. So let's talk about Miss America protests and the bra burning label. Here, as always, Nicole Hammer of Vanderbilt and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
And we have a special guest for this episode, the great Cristen Conger, podcaster and journalist. She is the founder and host of Unladylike, the long-running feminist lifestyle podcast. And then there's a new show just out now on the way, Conspiracy She Wrote, which unravels women's overlooked roles in today's conspiracy culture as instigators, evangelizers, and mascots of good versus evil. Cristen, thank you for doing this, and congratulations on the new podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
And I do want to get into whether you think this bra-burning myth and legend qualifies as a conspiracy theory, but we'll get into that. But first, let's just go to Atlantic City, the boardwalk. Cristen, do you know this story? I mean, have you done episodes on this? Have you covered it? Are you aware of the kind of protests at the Miss America pageant?
Yes, I have covered this moment, this particular protest, many times in my feminist research, in making Unladylike, and I think it's one of the seminal moments of second wave feminism because it really did, in a very pre-social media era, it really took the movement kind of viral for better or worse.
Yeah, it's something we still show pictures of if you're teaching the U.S. survey or if you're teaching feminism or women in the U.S. because the images may not be the image that everyone remembers. There's a real Mandela effect going on here of this image of bras being burned. But the images are so striking because they're mocking the Miss America pageant. I think at one point they crown a sheep. Very, very telling kind of moment. And they are stuffing all of these kind of artifacts of the patriarchy into this big barrel with bras and hairspray and makeup and corsets and false eyelashes, all of these things that are they're arguing are for the male gaze go into that trash can.
Yeah. It's funny because I don't think, and maybe this is a big statement to say, but I don't think anyone has looked at the Miss America pageant the same after this moment. This became because Miss America was not this contested thing. It was actually beloved and people loved to watch it and ooh and ah and all of that. And it's every sort of pageant thereafter is sort of met with a slight side eye. Okay, how do we feel about this? It certainly changed the way in my narrative that I've thought about it.
Well, and it was such appointment television that going back and reading the papers from the original group that organized it, the New York Radical Women, they were doing kind of a consciousness-raising group and decided that Miss America was the exact place, the perfect space that they wanted to protest because of how much it really did matter and kind of represent this hegemonic feminine ideal at the time. And there were some members of this, consciousness raising group who were grappling in real time with their own relationship to the pageant, the way they had been raised to want to become Miss America in a way. So the symbolism really was powerful. And I think that one thing that is often left out as well of the story is that, yes, there was the protesting happening outside on the boardwalk, but what really unnerved the Miss America organization was the fact that a few of the New York radical women protesters were able to get inside of the pageant hall and actually disrupt the ceremony and unfurl like a giant banner saying "No more Miss America."
On this question of why Miss America pageant was a target, I mean, does it say anything that, you know, some of the other, especially first wave feminist fights that we've covered, you know, are about sort of gaining rights that didn't exist or being let into particular spaces. And this is a protest of an existing space and sort of talking about the sort of representation there. But it wasn't like they were saying let certain kinds of people into the Miss America pageant or change the Miss America pageant in this particular way. It was more a protest of kind of what it represented. Does that indicate anything about the kind of nature of second wave feminism at the time?
Absolutely, because on the one hand, you have this New York radical women group that is using the Miss America protest as a way to, in the way that they put it, kind of awaken more women to societal oppression. Like that was one of their goals at the time, was really getting out the awareness of, hey, guess what? This thing, patriarchy, maybe you've heard of it, probably not. It is real. Let's talk about sexism. At the same time, on the exact same day, you have the first Miss Black America pageant that is also happening because Black women were not allowed to compete in Miss America. And to me, looking back, that is such a representation of the whiteness of mainstream second wave feminism and the oversights of the kinds of protests that really did become so ingrained in our popular idea of what second wave feminism and the women's liberation movement was and how whitewashed it became.
That is such a good point because, again, when I think about the pageant, I think about this moment and I think about when Vanessa Williams won and then was stripped away of her title. I don't know if we've done an episode on that, but we totally should if we haven't.
I think we did.
We think we did. We've done so many episodes. But like that sort of duality or the intersectionalness of that, like how we think about what is quintessential womanhood and beauty, and then what we think of it like in how we reconcile it with Black circles, also trying to have a similar thing, but for different, I think, motivations. It's just something I don't think people ever really tease out, you know?
But this group was sort of taking on a lot of the tactics of the Black civil rights movement, right? So there was a sense of solidarity or awareness there, at least, that like, oh, we can point to these other movements, these racial justice movements, in terms of how we're going to now turn up the temperature.
Absolutely. And I think that it's also, you were talking about the banner that gets unfurled and that image of all of these, of crowning the sheep. You know, in 1968 at the Chicago Convention, the Yippies nominate a pig to be president. It's like that kind of performance is such a big part of the protest culture of the late 1960s and the early 1970s. And that actually kind of gets us into the bra burning myth because there was this idea.
Before we do that.
Okay.
I just want to point out, because I don't want to gloss over the fact that they crowned a sheep. And moreover, the Yippies nominated a pig for president. So I'm just imagining the livestock of America in the summer of 68 getting pulled into all sorts of strange
and really getting some recognition. I mean, one of them becomes a presidential candidate. One of them becomes Miss America. Like this is the year if you are livestock to really make your mark. Progress.
All right, continue. Let's move to the bra burning incident or myth. Yeah.
I mean, remember one of the most powerful and evocative types of anti-war protest in the late 1960s was the burning of draft cards. And that was the way of sort of showing your rejection of the warfare state and showing your rejection of the war and saying, I am not going to be part of this system. And so when you hear bra burner, that is tapping into a deeper conversation and controversy over the burning that was happening in the 1960s as a form of protest. And I think influenced, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, but it influenced the women who were protesting, because they too kind of were like, we could burn a bra. That's a pretty evocative symbol.
Absolutely. And it's interesting too in 2024 to revisit the language that they used. They called it, a freedom trash can, where they were tossing their, their tools of patriarchal oppression, their girdles and cosmopolitan magazines, and yes, bras, into that. But they were calling it they wanted to have a freedom bonfire. Now, if someone was talking to me today about a freedom bonfire, I am thinking a horrifying book burning.
Yes.
Very different associations there today.
But we should be clear, because I think if people close their eyes and they think about, if they have an image in their head, it is, okay, there's the boardwalk, there's this trash can, there's people are throwing bras and other sort of symbols of the patriarchy into it, and there's fire inside of it. All of those are true up until the last part. There was no evidence that there was actually a fire set in the trash can on a boardwalk where these items were thrown in. And so, you're right, Niki, like this is pure Mandela effect, where people are sort of, not just sort of it's a myth, but people are literally like seeing the image in their head. I think I've seen that image in my head.
Yes, that's so true.
Yeah, you could just see the fire creeping up the strap and the cup, and you're like, that happened.
But there's no indication that happened. There's no indication that happened. And, part of it, I think, is because, like, what's a really good way to get a protest shut down is like start a fire, right? Like it's just starting a fire on the Atlantic City Boardwalk is probably a bad idea from a just practical perspective, right? So
because the boardwalk is made of wood.
Yeah, and people and the cops will like shut it down because it's a fire.
And they also threw hairspray in there too,
well,
which
that's
is highly flammable.
So you think
polyester and hairspray. This is not a good idea.
If bras actually had been burned, that could have very well been like the end of the second wave feminist movement because of the hairspray bomb that would have ignited.
Take out 7 liters of the movement in one bonfire. God. But in terms of how this becomes a myth, I mean, the specific TikTok, and then I want to get your thoughts on the sort of persistence of the myth in general, but the specific TikTok of how it got out there into the ether was that, Niki, again, you're right, that like there was this act of burning draft cards at the time. And so a reporter for the New York Post, it's always the fucking New York Post, a reporter for the New York Post writes a column in which they sort of draw a parallel between these two types of protests. They don't misrepresent it necessarily, but they kind of conflate all these acts of protest. And that is where the specific notion that bras were burned went out there into the world. It's a very evocative image, but yeah, Kellie, do you have thoughts on kind of...
and this may be petty, but I think it's the alliteration too.
100%.
Bra burning just rolls off the tongue in a way that girdle burning or hairspray burning or false eyelash burning does not have that same, even mop burning, it doesn't have that same kind of cachet. And so I think that that's part of the myth is how it flows off your tongue, right? How it sounds. And because it sounds good, it sounds more legitimate.
Hey there, Jody here, and I'm very excited to tell you that Wait For It is back for Season 2. Wait For It is one of the newer members of the Radiotopia family, but it is already one of the most acclaimed podcasts around. If I took the time to list every award and best of list that it has been on, we'd run out of time. So I'll just tell you that Wait For It is hosted by Ronald Young Jr. And by the way, Wait is W-E-I-G-H-T. And it tells not only his story, but the stories of all types of folks, fat and straight-sized, who can't seem to keep weight off their minds. This season features stories about grief, fat camp, air travel, as well as conversations with brilliant people like Martinez Evans and Aubrey Gordon of Maintenance Phase. The new season of Wait For It. It's audio storytelling at its very finest, and it launches September 5th. Congratulations to Ronald and the team, and congratulations to all of us for having a new season of Wait For It, wherever we get our podcasts.
And it also sounds kind of hysterical, right?
Yeah.
You're not only taking your bra off, you are fully burning it.
Well, hysterical in both meanings of the word, probably, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, it was used to portray people as unhinged and over the top, and kind of like to dismiss them, right? Or I guess that's my question: is sort of this myth, both in the '60s and then as it persisted today. I mean, do you see it as a positive portrayal, or do you see it being used to kind of dismiss the movement as stunty or whatever?
The movement itself was both excited by the attention that this moment got, but they were also keenly aware of how pejorative it was. That, you know, it wasn't lost on them that A, they hadn't actually been burning bras, and B, that it was already being kind of slung as a way to discredit their cause. Because it's also collapsing all of the very legitimate political things that they were protesting for and reducing it down to bra burning. And even in the story with the New York Post, which incredible that the New York Post copy desk headline writers, even back then, were somehow, you know, putting these kinds of ideas into the ether. The reporter who went, they kind of begrudgingly sent a woman to cover the event because the New York Radical Women, in their press release about the event, had said, "We will only talk to women, no newsmen." They use that word, newsman. And so this reporter who went out was actually becoming kind of radicalized herself by the movement. And that was part of why she was really excited to go cover it. And she was also then quickly disheartened to see how the copy desk, you know, gave it that headline of bra burner, and it just took off from there.
Yeah, I mean, here we are more than 50 years later, and I think bra burner is still thrown around as a term for, like, oh, you overly hysterical woman, like, you know, it's up there with feminazi as a way of dismissing women.
Yeah, reductive, dismissive, the whole 9 yards. I've never heard it used in a positive connotation, put it that way. She's so great. She's such a bra burner. You know, like.
Should we reclaim it?
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, maybe.
Well, on that front, I mean, I guess I'm surprised. It doesn't seem like there are actually any instances we can point to where bras were burned, right? Is that right, Cristen? Do you know? I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot here, but my sense is that it didn't become it's not an actual tactic, didn't become a tactic.
No, it did not. And what's also interesting is that cut to 1970 in the New York Times style section, they're covering how braless fashion is in, you know, so it also just becomes part of a broader kind of cultural moment where, you know, women were considering life perhaps without bras and girdles briefly. Yeah. No pun intended.
Yeah, right. There's part of me that's like a little surprised it didn't become even a kind of like ironic thing. Like, you know, sometimes you see that where like a myth goes out there and it becomes attached to a movement incorrectly, but then the movement embraces it and sort of appropriates it for itself. So there's part of me that's a little surprised that the sort of movement didn't sort of say, well, okay, we didn't do this thing, but now people think we're doing this thing. We'll try it. But I think maybe there was an awareness even at the time that this can be used to sort of dismiss or sideline us as unserious. Do you want to, as we wrap up, Cristen, do you want to talk a little bit about the group itself and kind of how important this moment was in terms of this group, New York Radical Women? I mean, one of the quotes from one of the organizers, Carol Hanisch, who said, you know, we hadn't really done a lot of actions. We were a small movement doing a lot of kind of intellectual work. And this was the first time we said, okay, we got to get some attention here. So can you just sort of put that in context or talk about the specific group itself?
So this group was highly influential, and another key figure in organizing the Miss America protest was Robin Morgan, who became a major figurehead of the women's liberation movement. And, you know, kind of going back to the question of why didn't more feminists kind of across the country take the bra burning and run with it? I think this is also a moment that shows what is to come in terms of kind of divisions within the broader second wave movement between more, I don't want to say conservative, but more cautious organizations like your National Organization for Women, led by Betty Friedan and others who were not interested in these kinds of antics. They wanted women to be taken seriously. They wanted the politics to be taken seriously. And there was a lot of conflict and concern that, oh, well, if we become too associated with bra burners, this would also become an issue with too associated with lesbians. Like, there was a lot of kind of feminist pearl clutching, white feminist pearl clutching, I should say, that was happening at the same time as groups like the New York Radical Women are, getting all of this attention. And I think obviously you need kind of both happening at the same time to really make the impact that the movement had. But within women's liberation, it was a messy movement.
I mean, that tension between mainstream and radical you see it today. You see it at the DNC. You see it at in basically any political movement, that the mainstream that is seeking respectability and a seat at the table is sometimes working with and sometimes working against the more radical factions who see the entire enterprise as corrupt.
You see it with the Civil Rights Movement and the Black Panther Party, for sure. There are always these sort of extremes that are trying to push the conversation further. And that's legit. But at the same time, you see how these groups can easily get undermined and then pitted against each other. And then it just all becomes very counterproductive. And then, I don't know, then you add COINTELPRO and the FBI, and then it's a wrap.
There was some FBI. There were some feds on that boardwalk as well, of course. All right, final thought. And I want to circle back to something Kellie said about this kind of maybe being a moment where it just sort of changed the way people, maybe especially women, saw the Miss America pageant. I mean, do you have further thoughts on that, and particularly now with what it means and holds, and whether there's a sort of feminist embrace of the Miss America pageant in any way? I mean, there is a quote from one of the organizers of the 1968 event where they basically say, look, this is diminishing the work of all these competitors who've worked really hard, and they're women too. And, I think you probably hear that defense a lot. But any thoughts on kind of what the Miss America pageant means now and how feminists should think about it?
In today's beauty pageant culture, I think the politics of beauty pageants and their cultural significance are way more powerful at this point beyond the United States. In the U.S., I think it has lost a lot of relevance. And you've seen the pageant itself kind of try to post-Me Too kind of contort itself into a pageant that even feminists, could support. But honestly,
it's a scholarship.
Exactly. And it is a scholarship. That's absolutely true. And I also think that it's maybe this is just very millennial feminist of me to say, but I think in this era that we're living in now, the Miss America protest and that kind of what can look on its face like radical feminists coming to take down, just pretty girls from the Midwest who want a scholarship. Or I don't even know if it was a scholarship program back then. Probably not. It was, probably a free engagement ring. But it feels like a starting point rather than, a very kind of 1.0 moment. And it's fascinating, too, to go back and read the New York Radical Women's memos. They're housed at Duke University, and I was reading through some of them where they are rehashing okay, what did we do right and what did we do wrong with this action? Because they're we got all the attention, but also, some of the signs, honestly, were sexist. We have to be careful about how these kinds of tactics that we are using. So it's it's interesting how I think those kinds of conversations and debates are still happening within feminism today, but also hopefully with a more intersectional understanding that there are complexities that need to be taken into account with all of when you're demanding freedom for all women. Which women are we talking about?
Final thing, because I mentioned at the beginning, but your new show is Conspiracy She Wrote. So does this count as a conspiracy theory?
The bra burning itself does not count as a conspiracy theory. It is simply a myth. But it does, again, connect to the kind of incoming divisions within the feminist movement and the fact that by that time, COINTELPRO was very much watching these local feminist groups that were starting to pop up around the country. That would continue for many years, and cut to later in the 70s as the movement to ratify the ERA is kind of falling apart. There's awareness within the movement on both the mainstream side and the radical side that the FBI has been infiltrating groups and monitoring them. And you have both Betty Friedan and Robin Morgan on their kind of separate respective sides of the feminist spectrum, both implying that the feminist movement had been taken down by FBI infiltrators. And maybe the CIA. There's a whole plot about, conspiracy theory within the more radical factions of the movement that Gloria Steinem was essentially a CIA psyop. So,
wow.
Nice.
Yes.
The CIA was not staying in its lane in the late 1960s. So it's entirely possible.
And she was not. For the record, she was not.
But if you are intrigued by this kind of thinking and these kinds of themes, there is a new podcast for you. It's called Conspiracy She Wrote, which is out now. It looks into women's roles in today's conspiracy culture as instigators, evangelizers, and mascots of good versus evil. And of course, Cristen, Unladylike continues as an Unladylike book. Anything else you want to plug? I mean, that's a lot. That's plenty.
I think that's plenty. That'll keep folks busy for a while. Yes, but thank you so much for having me.
Really
this has been so much fun.
All right. Well, thanks to Cristen Conger and Nicole Hemmer. Thanks to you.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson. Thanks to you.
My pleasure.
Thanks for listening to This Day in Esoteric Political History. Our researcher and producer is Jacob Feldman. Our producer is Brittany Brown. Our transcripts, which you can find on our website, are done by Kala Nakua. This Day is a proud member of Radiotopia from PRX, a network of independent, creator-owned, listener-supported podcasts. Audrey Martovich is executive producer. Yuri Lasordo is director of operations. If you want to support the show, tell a friend about This Day and become a member of Radiotopia at whatever level works for you. You can do that at our website, thisdaypod.com. Also on our site, you can find transcripts, sign up for our newsletter, find links to follow us on Instagram and Threads, buy merch like shirts and hats and phone cases, find information about our theme song, give feedback on an episode we've done, or suggest topics for a future episode. That and lots more, thisdaypod.com. My name is Jody Avirgan. We'll see you soon.
Radiotopia from